where the CMO collections go downwards. It is the only country in the world. Collections in the CMO world always go upwards, never downwards. The third statistic, Honorable CS. The role of the police here, and to allay fears for maybe the people or businessmen watching at home, the role of the police here will not be strictly to arrest. In our experience, when the police are working with us, it acts as a deterrent. Because when people are aware that MCSK camp police are coming to Tashikwa, we had 90% payments being made and only 10% or less being arrested. Honorable Chair, we were rarely actually in court with cases of arrest because of the deterrent effect in our licensing process. And why is that, Honorable Chair? As has been explained here by Dr. Mtua and the ED, in our strategy, as we license, businesses are able to see, if let's say you're working with the police, business number one at this end can see you coming to the police on the other end, so that the word spreads that they are wanakuja. It's sort of the way City Council is. The sort of the way City Council used to operate. Unasikia kanjo anakuja. On the shop on one end, that the police are coming with MCSK. Immediate effect is money starts coming to our accounts, so that we do not actually have to arrest when it is seen that this is something which is legal and is being enforced. Honorable Chair, it is just for these reasons that we are imploring upon the Honorable CS to assist us, just to be able to get this snowball effect, so that, as you heard from the statistics, we are able to make this sector a sector that actually can employ people. Many of the musicians, many of the creators are losing faith in us because they feel that we're not able to do our job. And the reason is we are only not able to do our job just because we're not able to enforce or to have compliance. That is it. In closing, Honorable Chair and Honorable CS, when we do not have compliance, we end up now spending more in terms of administrative costs, because now we end up going into legal processes and other mechanisms where we now spend more having to hire lawyers, having to file civil suits, which are more expensive. The net effect is it affects Madam Honorable CS and Madam Chair. Many times you'll hear that the CMOs are spending too much money, yet the money we are spending is partly because we're trying to enforce compliance, partly because we have to spend legal fees, partly because we have to go to court and hire lawyers in these instances. But with the police, this will definitely improve. As I mentioned here, we were doing very well and now are doing extremely embarrassingly poorly just because we don't have a deterrent effect with us. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Sorry, Honorable Chair. I just wanted to add that we have, the submissions I've made are contained in our report dated 8th August 2023. And I think that has been circulated from camp, and wished to rely on it for the other details that I'm not touched on.
Thank you. We have received. Do we have any more? Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair and the CS. I only have 2 points that I need to add. Point number one, when we talk of the creative sector, just like it has been said by the ED, we are also referring to the dramatic works. That is now the acting, what you call audiovisual work, and Plisk represents that. Number two, and I would like to call upon all of us now in this building to ask ourselves one question. The Kenyan culture, how do Kenyans behave when it comes to licensing, including the local government, for example, permits, business permits? It's until when they hear that there will be an inspector coming or there will be some form of enforcement being done that they rush to make the payments. In fact, Kenyans, we are the last, we normally say we do things at the last minute. The last minute in our case is when enforcement is being done. What would that mean, therefore, is the CMOs or even Kikobo, in absence of the police, then it is totally hard for us to do collections. Finally, the Chair, the CS, the Kenya Kwanza government, the manifesto, the plan, and I've been looking at your page 40, specifically on the creative sector, the artists. If we, the CMOs, the collective management organizations, are not able to collect anything from our local market, then it will mean this agenda, this government agenda then might not be achieved. So we call upon you, Bwana CS, to assist us in this. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that was the last speaker on your side. Thank you. Honorable CS, this committee, as a committee that oversees sports and culture, I think in our interest is to see the creative industry flourish. Ours is to see that the livelihoods of the artists and the entire supply chain around the creative sector improves. And therefore, that is why it is a deliberate effort by this committee to see to it that there is orderliness. And listening to the CEO of Kekobo and the CEOs or directors of other CMOs, all they're looking for is to get confidence from the players within the sector, so that when they go out there to collect, they need the goodwill of the government. They want to be recognized that the activity they are doing is legal. They are not trying to get some money from, the players in the sector. So basically we want to hear from you, having listened to them, whether your ministry is able to give this support to reinstate enforcement, to give them the police officers so that they are able to effectively collect the royalties for the benefit of the artists. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members of the and all the other participants in these deliberations. Chair, as it has been pointed out, there was a relationship between the National Police Service and the agencies, namely the collective management organizations, who have been tasked with enforcing the laws related to copyrights and other intellectual property rights in the creative sector. That relationship broke down at some point. And I believe the purpose of this meeting is to try and restore that relationship. The National Police Service has an obligation to generally assist all agencies and arms of government to enforce the law of our country. Of course, it is not possible for every agency and every officer within the public sector to be provided on new frontiers of support. Recently, the Water Department wanted us to include the protection of critical water infrastructure and water resources and major water bodies like dams, and we allowed that. So from the outset, I just want to say it is the mandate of the National Police Service to support all public agencies and public officers who have some law enforcement to be done, because it's only the National Police Service that is legitimately allowed to use all methods, including force, to enforce the law. Number two, I agree with the submissions which have been made before you, Chair, to the extent that the constitutional guarantee to the right to property is not limited to the right to physical property. It also includes the right of every person to their intellectual property. Therefore, the same way we enforce people whose land has been encroached by illegal people, the same way we protect commercial buildings from attack or from violence, even intellectual property must be protected from violation. This includes copyrights, literary and artistic works, patents, geographical indications, and all the spectrum of the intellectual property recognized under Kenyan and international law. I also want to say that we also agree with the submission to the extent that the Kenya Kwanza administration has promised that the creative arts industry will be supported so that we realize the potential of our artists and the innovators in this space. And I also appreciate and acknowledge, as it has been submitted, that His Excellency the President has already made commitments and targets that must be met in this sector. That, therefore, is being made. Nevertheless, Honorable Chair, organizations, including the Music Copyright Society of Kenya, the Kenya Association of Government, the National Police Service is governed by, in their operations, is governed by the Constitution. It is also governed by the National Police Service Act of 2011. But it's also governed by the standing orders of the National Police Service. And whenever there is a specific operation to be carried out, there are standard operating procedures, and depending on the nature of the operation, there are sometimes an operation order that guides that operation, so that whatever activity, because these are armed officers, in case there is misuse of firearms or misuse of the legitimate violence of the state, then somebody can take accountability. There must be a commander of that operation and the number of officers and what they are supposed to do from what time to what time and so forth and so on. In the process of the activities that preceded the termination of this relationship that we are talking about here today, there were numerous complaints on extortion during those operations, extorting from members of the public, which is an offense. And it was not clear who between the police or officers of the CMOs was responsible. It became not clear, and I need to be clear, Chair, with great respect, that the problem of crime, corruption, extortion, bribery is not limited to any particular agency. It's not a problem of the CMOs, or it's everywhere. The National Police Service is affected. The public sector right now is affected fundamentally. It's become like a national culture. But the problem we had as the Interior Ministry in 2020 was that, as much as we know that there are some of our officers who are corrupt and extort or try to extort money from members of the public, the conflation of our officers with the CMOs in operations where the there were no clear standard operating procedures and operation orders, was making it difficult for us to know whether these claims of extortion are being made by our officers, the National Police Service officers, or by the CMOs staff. There were instances of persons who were arrested in those operations being held in police cells, and when they are in our custody, cases of extortion and bribes being sought while we have people in our custody. There was thirdly failure by the CMOs to present arrested persons before court within the time frames that are allowed, because again of the lack of clarity on whose work is this and who does what. And there was failure by the CMOs to present themselves in court to provide witnesses after we have made arrests. So this relationship was destroyed just on the basis of image. And it was not clear for us to know, is it our officers who are perpetuating this criminal conduct, or is it CMO staff? And that's why the police withdrew. And as I've said, the police cannot be everywhere. But where the police deploy themselves, there must be a way in which anything that involves police action that goes where we can assign responsibility to those who misuse the legitimate instruments of state violence, which is the violence to protect society from criminals and from people who want to deprive life and property and liberty of other people, including people who want to pirate and steal intellectual property from the people of Kenya. I have heard from the submissions that the inspectors that are available are not enough, because I would have suggested that then Kikobo can and the CMOs can use the inspectors that they have to carry out with this mandate. And from where I sit or stand, if a discussion was to be opened on the support which is being sought by Kikobo and the CMOs, then that relationship, that discussion must first lead to, first of all, a firm and verifiable assurances that the operations will be done in a manner that does not damage or improperly imputes wrongdoing on police officers. And this can only be done when there is some form of memorandum and some form of agreement in forms of standard operating procedures, in form of ways to ensure that the roles of the respective players in the enforcement operations are well defined. But until such a time when that clarity is provided, until such a time when such agreements are in place in writing, it is our position that the status quo remains. And finally, Chair and members, I am open as the Minister responsible for the national security and law enforcement policy, I am open to a review of whether the request being made can be granted, and if those discussions provide a persuasive case, then it's at that point that I'm able to make a determination whether this is a matter that falls under paragraph 4 of Article 245 of the Constitution, in which case the Cabinet Secretary can direct the Inspector General of Police to take any action that is necessary. At the moment, I am persuaded that the action taken by the National Police Service was legitimate in the circumstances in which I have presented and which have been admitted by those who have spoken before me. That action was legitimate. As to whether it can be reviewed, it could be reviewed, and if the conditions for verifiability and compliance with individual responsibility of all the players in these operations, if those frameworks are assured and put in place, at that point, the Cabinet Secretary may consider whether this is a matter under which he may exercise the powers under Section Article 245(4) of the Constitution I submit.
Thank you, Honorable CS. Honorable members, you can now ask any questions, and I think Honorable Oskey, his hand was up first. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, CS, for the concise and very informative response. As I listen to you, you are addressing a certain coordination in order to bring on board a platform to have a discussion between the ministry and the team requesting for this service. In my understanding, in this case, the authority to coordinate that invitation with the intervention of Parliament, as the case is now, lies with the ministry itself. Now, the authority to provide security is in the ministry, lies with your ministry, and the request being made by the agencies is because you are in charge. And with your advice, who should coordinate this particular discussion? But because it is very important in order to deal with the matters that really led into this state. Number two, and we all concur that it is a matter of law, that the Constitution anticipates that the police service will be available to the citizens of this country, and especially the way you have given it, that protecting property is not the physical one, but even includes intellectual property. This is the opportunity now. The Ministry of Interior should protect the intellectual property of our citizens, and the coordination and to correct such misnomer or anomalies that has existed is entirely in the docket of the ministry concerned. So I think as a committee, the expectation by inviting your office and you is not only to give an explanation, but to provide a solution. And if there is a need that which I don't see, where you need the assistance of Parliament, because this one is purely administrative. And finally, Chair, I wish to state maybe you need to, as an interagency, as the way I've seen you working in controlling banditry in this country and criminal, by engaging a multi-agency or interagency approach, which will bring in Kekobo as a regulator in the field, who is going to supervise the activities of this collection. And again, I still feel, in my opinion, Chair, that yes, the direction of coordination and making this happen is not necessarily an authority of the CMOs, but now it is in your docket to call all the players and make the demand of government. Thank you, Chair.
Allow me to recognize the arrival of our Vice Chair, Honorable Mshukuru. If you could introduce yourself.
I'm Guido Mashukuru, Member of Parliament Kabete, and the Vice Chair of this committee.
Thank you. I give it to Honorable Karoli, then Honorable Yagon, and then Honorable Basil, Honorable Njuguna, in that order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Honorable Minister, I absolutely agree with you that intellectual property is just physical property like anybody else. And if we look at it in terms of musicians, their stock in trade. For us lawyers, we say time is our stock in trade. For them, their stock in trade is basically the playtime their music gets. And I was just wondering what Gabriel Omolo now, his family, whenever we listen to the song Lunchtime, and it is lunchtime and probably his family is not having a meal, or Kakai Kilonzo, Kenya Inchi Yetu, and we are listening to it and his family is not feeling they are part of Kenya. Basically what I'm trying to say is that to abandon this particular process of enforcement to realize revenues for musicians is basically to starve them, and it is actually theft. So I think the solution lies in the proposal that is being made, that we have a robust operational and enforcement protocol, interagency. And I've not had opportunity to go through it, but the little I've seen in the highlights, my suggestion would be that the enforcement protocol be strengthened, and I would recommend you engage Office of the DPP, you engage the judiciary, you engage ICT, and you engage the National Police Service, so that you have an operational and enforcement protocol for collection of royalties, which should also be gazetted, I believe, by the minister responsible for copyright, so that it has a force of law and it is recognized. Because, and then to have a very strong digitization component, so that before you go to enforce, you should be able to clearly tell who and who, where, have not paid for their licensing fees and royalties, instead of just appearing and surprising people. But I think we should not abandon them. I think the ministry should really be involved in this matter, because without the police, I do not see how they will be able to collect the revenues, and the data already shows the steep drop. And if we don't do it, we are basically taking food from the mouths of our musicians and their families. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Honorable CS, from what we have heard from all the CMOs and the Kekobo, is that from the time the police were withdrawn in 2020, you could have seen where in the statistic which was given by Maurice Okot from camp, that from 2017 there was some good revenue which was being collected, and you could see the graph going down. I would have loved also to see from 2022 where the graph is, because by 2021 they were hardly collecting 150 million. So this shows that when the police were present, or when the security forces were present, they were using as what they had alleged, what they used as a deterrent to make sure that they collect, the people pay. And I know if the police also are working hand in hand with these CMOs, in one way or another, the police or the security department is earning some money from them. So I think it is very high time that we also consider this and make sure that we give them this security to get more royalties, whereby this administration also is trying to push for more revenues in terms of taxes. So we beseech you to make, to see and consider this request from the CMOs and Kekopo. Thank you very much. I submit.
Honorable Bassel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, CS. I think I will stand to support the CS because we will not allow extortion or harassment of members of public from the police. Because when you listen to the CS, the circumstances under which led to withdrawal of the police was basically based on extortion and harassment of members of public. So I fully support that an MOU is needed, because if you hear members of public making a cry, and if we reinforce this is not in line with protecting people and also ensuring law and order. So I think as much as we see the need, there is the importance to have an agreement that is inclusive, where all stakeholders are involved and everyone makes a submission to be able to ensure if the police are used, they don't go out to extort or harass members of public in the pretext of collecting more loyalties. So I think I agree with the CS, and we need to reconsider into this matter as we come up with a draft agreement that is inclusive and that is exhaustive as much as possible. Thank you.
Yogona.
Thank you.
And then Catherine.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks so much to the CS. In a way, I understand where the CMOs are coming from, but also I rebel with the CS because, Madam Chair, the Kenyan taxpayers should not be footing the bill to help a private organization collect their dues. We cannot reduce our police force to be a debt collection agency. The CMOs need to innovate ways to correct these dues. Madam Chair, there are so many organizations out there, there are so many Kenyans out there who are in business. And let's be real, let's be frank. The CMOs also, as much as we say they are non-profit, they're in business. They're in business because they are collecting revenue. The idea that the Kenyan people should pay on their behalf to collect the revenues doesn't sit well with me. Because what about the other Kenyans who are out there, the organizations that are out there, the Kenyan people who have businesses and they have customers out there who owe them money? What a message are we sending to the rest of the Kenyans? That here we have an organization that gets the police protection to collect their dues. Madam Chair, businesses out there and the organizations, they are suffering because they provided the service, but yet the money but yet they have not collected their dues. They come up with ways. They are debt collection agencies. Madam Chair, this doesn't sit well with me. I think the CMOs need to come up with ways of how to collect the revenues at a time when Kenyans, we actually have a shortage of police officers. We have Kenyans who are being killed in some areas of Kenya. The idea that we should send our police officers to help an organization
correct revenues is just ridiculous. It's up, by the way, it's an insult to those Kenyans who are suffering out there, those Kenyans who need security out there. CS, I agree with you. This should not happen. Let them come up with ways of how to collect revenues. The other countries that collect revenues for their musicians, what do they get? The police officers from those countries? No, we need the police officers to do their job. The police officers' job is not to help private organizations get out there and collect their revenues. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Probably before I give it to Catherine, just to guide the discussion, when we go to Article 104 on National Police Service, it says that the Inspector General may, on application by any person, station an officer for duty at such a place and for such period as the Inspector General may approve. 2, notwithstanding subsection 1, the Inspector General shall only deploy an officer for private use for the protection of public good or interest. Thank you. Honorable Catherine,
Madam Chair.
just so that we are guided.
Yes, for sure, Madam Chair. I do agree with you. But at the moment, at a time where we have a shortage of our police officers, we cannot do that. Now, if a time comes when actually we have filled all the gaps out there for security, then now we can move into revenue collection. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Honorable Catherine. After that, we shall have Honorable Janet give us submissions.
Thank you. But public or private, we are all Kenyans, as long as they are paying their revenues and they are not also taking advantage of the musicians. So I really appreciate Bwana CS for you coming here and, you know, us communicating this way. My view was, although you withdrew, I think they need help. But how will we make sure that actually the police don't take advantage of also their desperation? I think I always see Safaricom, they send a Mama Mboga to an agent to see if that agent follows the instructions. So the agent, the Mama Mboga goes to the agent and says, I forgot my wallet, I don't have an ID, but I have the number of head. Kindly deposit this money for me. And there'll be just somewhere, somebody just casual, maybe in the line, also witnessing. Immediately this agent gives in and actually takes the money. They are arrested and they are blacklisted, maybe for 3 months or 6 months, depending on how habitually they've been doing that. So our policemen and women are our people as well. They need to be purged, they need to be corrected too, they need to be passed up to not break the law, but protect any business, even if it's private, as long as they also bring that revenue to us. So it is good also to compartmentalize where this is so rampant. Is it in the town? Is it in the villages? Where exactly the police have been extorting and disturbing people, extorting them. And then now that place can also be reinforced. During also recruitment, you don't send somebody who wanted to be a mechanic to go and do that. I believe that today, if you recruited, there is a police who did business studies, wanted to do maybe music, wanted to be a doctor, a pharmacist. So if you see also the area of alignment in the police during recruitment, you see somebody who has a talent, is a soldier but can sing, understands the pain of the artists, any kind of talent they have. Such a person might have some passion to protect what they also want to be or have always dreamt to be. So sometimes we just send these police, the soldiers, anywhere to do anything as long as there is a gap. But I think sometimes also some professionalism in them can help us improve our situation. We all know in Kenya, once you see people in the police attire, there is a signal in you. If you have not complied, you start saying, even if they forgive me today, next time they come, I will have the permit, I will have at least torn the line. So somehow the police help, even if they are a bit corrupt, but it's just some purging measures that we need to put in place to improve how we all run anything, any institution. Thank you.
Honorable Janet.
Thank you, Chair. I think in my view, I want to say that the two parties have a case here, and I want to actually make it so that the two institutions have been operating on a freelance mode. And I want to plead with the CS that from his response, there is actually need for the two parties to sit down and have an operation, an MOU on how to operate for the sake of our music operators and for the sake of our youth who actually are the beneficiaries. So I think there must be an MOU and agreed plan on how to carry out the operation. And this begs a question to the CMOs and Kekopo. Is there an operation policy that actually gives you ways of collecting the royalties? Do you have an operation policy to collect royalties in place? Maybe that should have actually guided you in all this. So that was my question, whether there is an operation policy to collect the royalties so that it's easier from the CMOs and Kekopo. That would be the question that would be begging. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to give my views. Honorable CS, I want to support your position. I beg to differ with my brother. Whereas I agree there are other areas that are more pressing, that require police presence and action. But we cannot give a blind eye to the young people. Honorable CS, you agree with me, unemployment is an issue in this country. And we have a lot of talent in the young people. Vijana wetu wamejituma kujizalisha ajira. So we must support them. So I want to support the position that the CS has proposed. There is need for an MOU. There is need for the two parties, the ministry and the CMOs, Kekoba and the team, to meet and agree on certain terms so that there is order, there is an agreed procedure on how this can be undertaken. These officers do not have to be attached to be permanently offering that service, but it can be arranged in such a way it is once in a while when there is need. When there is default and there is need to enforce that those payments to be made, then it can be organized as a one-off arranged, activity. So for me, we must support the creative industry. We must support those young talents out there so that they can be inspired, motivated, and by doing that, we'll be building this economy and also aligning ourselves to the plan, which is the president's own, promise to Kenyans that we must build a creative industry. Thank you. So I don't know, you want to add, Honorable Juguna and Honorable Basil, as we bring it to, we approach closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would like to hear at least from the CMOs, at least other ways that they can be able to collect these monies. Because, let's be real, at the moment, you had the CS, the police are not coming. So what does it mean? You just stay there and wait. So, Madam Chair, these revenues needs to be collected. That's why I'm actually helping them. I'm advocating for them to come up with, be innovative, come up with ways where you can collect these revenues without the police force. Now the police force is not coming. You had the CS. I agree with him. The police should not come. It doesn't mean you stop to collect these revenues. So what are you going to do, guys? What are you going to do? Thank you.
You are advised to think outside the box, probably like KRA, think outside the box so that you only involve the police when necessary. So I give this to any other members.
Yeah, I think I agree with Honorable Shege, because in principle, we need to copy from best practices. We can't just be using the police to serve as debt collectors. Because if you go to the first world, the artists there are well enumerated, and they don't use the police to reinforce this. So we need to have an agreement without necessarily calling for the police to act as debt collectors. Because you heard it very clearly. That's exactly what I mentioned about extortion and harassment. Because when you use the police, there's what goes around, the element of scaring the citizens. And that is why we fully support the CS in that particular decision, and they say an MOU is needed, as opposed to just taking out or calling the police to be reinstated for the purpose that can be of a role that can be played without necessarily using the police. Thank you.
Let's hear clarification from Carolio Mondi, then I'll give 1 minute to Kekobo and team, then we close with the CS. Okay.
Thank you very much, Honorable Madam Chair. I think we need to have a common understanding that the royalties are by way of licensing. And the licensing regime is a legal regime established under a statute of parliament, where you are required to pay. So if you are operating without a license, effectively you've committed a crime. And effectively you are subject to arrest by the police. I think we need to have that clarification in our heads. It is not a voluntary payment. This is a payment required by law. It is like operating a hospital without a license. That is illegal. That is already an offense. For which, in other words, what I'm trying to say, the police has to be involved to enforce the law. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
I give this opportunity to Kekobo and the team.
Thank you, members, and the CS for the candid discussion. I think, you note that in my presentation I did not hide that there were problems. And I stated that these problems can be mitigated. And I'm very happy that you've opened a window for discussion. I wish to report that there is a pending MOU between Kekobo and the National Police Service, which we can explore quickly. And also to request for an interim measure, which is that when Kekobo officers go to the field, they still need the uniformed police to escort them. Though a few of them may be armed, they still need to inform the OCS. But the OCS, while it may be willing to escort my officers in supporting the CMOs, still recalls that there was a circular issued by the Office of the Inspector General taking away the privilege from the CMOs. So if we could have as an interim measure, as we discuss between the ministry where I come from and where the CS comes from, we could have a circular saying that where the CMOs are accompanied by Kekobo inspectors, they can be given an opportunity to operate in the meantime, just because we really are in a very dire situation with the commitments that I indicated have been made to the president by the CMOs and ourselves. So we really need to manage this. I agree, there was a problem. I kept on reading a lot of news stories about harassment, but there was also a third party called the Talent Works and Rights, which is a private entity that was imposing on the public, and that was the key extortionists entity. So in a way, the CMOs are victim of the success of that entity, because the entity had people within the police service. So when they moved, when the OCPD moved from one area to another, are friends of that entity, they would see the complaints rise in that county. And when they move, that person again moves to another place, you see the complaints where it came from go down and then rise in another place. So there are bad elements in the police service. We do admit our mistakes. I do admit on behalf of my licensees that the mistakes were made. But it's very critical. It's actually an offense to play music in public without a license under Section 38, subsection 2 of the Copyright Act, as my learned senior Carol Mondi mentioned. So it's very key. So I would like the CMOs also to speak for themselves. I'll start with Dr. Mutua.
Through the chair, Prof, I would like to make a very specific prayer in the presumption of good faith that mistakes were committed, but we are honorable members of the public and we have come to you and engaged you publicly before this committee and before the media. And you can even see the level of cohesion and the collaboration between ourselves and the Kenya Copyright Board and the guidance of this committee and your office. I want to make some very specific prayers to you. One, that you give in the interim, in the presumption of good faith, that we'll act in good faith and do the right thing, 6 months at least for this support, so that a message does not go out there that actually musicians are on their own. That the Minister of Government came to this committee and said, no, you can pirate their music, you can use their music in your public events and in your businesses, and you on your own. Because if that message goes that way, Mr. Bwana CS, then we will have betrayed, we'll have abandoned our people. Professor, this music industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it's also very easy to abuse because of the manner in which copyright business operates, because there are so many layers, from the artists themselves who are totally ignorant of even copyright, some of them who would even sell it for a song. The users themselves who are members of the public, who may not know. People who operate public service vehicles who may not even know, a tout who is not educated about copyright and does not understand what we are talking about. It is on that basis that I would want to plead that a message does not go out there that musicians are on their own. That while we work on this interim measure, and I commit, Professor, that we can even have, even if we be given 5 that we can be meeting with, to send the message there that the police are not withdrawn and they are not abandoning artists, that we can be even filing quarterly or even weekly reports that show where they were given and how the operation is being done. And there is someone accountable through the office of the ED who is reporting and coordinating that operation. To finish, Madam Chair, we were not asking that the police come and stay with us. We are only asking when we need them. In fact, there are some well-meaning business people who call us to pay without even anybody asking them. I went to open a business along Mombasa Road last Friday, and I was invited by a friend, but I asked, have they paid copyright license? And I was amazed to see that that guy, without any police or any of our members calling, had already paid. So it's only where there's abuse, like in public service vehicles. It is in certain areas where we need you. And we're asking that in terms of this meeting, a message is said that in the interim, there's something we can do with your office to ensure that musicians do not feel abandoned, and the cartels in the industry do not take advantage and send the message that even government does not support you.
Let's finish with this team.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Honorable CS. I'd just like to shift the perspective a little in terms of what we're submitting. Honorable Chair, Madam and Honorable CS, we are saying under Section 38 of the law by which we operate, we identify criminal offenses being committed. We have set up a procedure that we use towards identification. It is a 6-step procedure, Madam Chair. It is a 6-step procedure. At the last instance, after issuing demand letters, after issuing the notice of infringement, after issuing several reminders, at the last instance, step number 6, we are now saying this is a criminal offense. Madam Chair, Honorable CS, are we saying when a criminal offense has been committed towards the intellectual property of our creatives, are we saying we cannot get the police to arrest the persons committing a criminal offense? In a nutshell, Honorable CS, that is what my learned senior Honorable Member Karoli was saying. A criminal offense has been committed. We have identified it. We are seeking assistance only in arresting this person who has committed a criminal offense. Madam Chair, I'd even hesitate to ask, does it require an MOU to enforce a criminal offense that has been identified? Do we even need to be discussing an MOU saying, umeiba gari yangu? Let's have an agreement, or now I'll arrest you because sababu umeiba gari yangu. That is to the extent of what we are now deliberating, because we are saying it is so clear, these are the steps, this is the offense, why can't you not arrest this person? That in a nutshell is what we are saying, honorable members.
Honorable members, you know we have a session in the afternoon, and
very
we are already at 1:30.
Very important. This one is very important.
We seem to be going around a vicious circle, so do I
just
give each one of you 1 minute,
yes,
then I
yes.
take back the discussion to the CS?
Yes.
Which hand was up before?
Mine.
Catherine.
Thank you.
Then Janet, you had something. Njuguna? Okay, the 3 of you. Basili will talk twice. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, to all of you seated there. You're doing little to make the public know that what you're asking for actually is illegal or legal. Like people do advertisement, Blue Band, Coca-Cola. If I'm thirsty, I'll think Coca-Cola. So you need to also come out there. Don't sit pretty here in the cities. Go into the village, huko disco matanga ziko tunacheza tu muziki huko. But they don't know that it's illegal. So everybody in Kenya, whether a grandmother or a child, must know and own and be responsible that piracy is illegal. But it is you to tell us in any language, even if it's Luya, I can translate.
1 minute, Honorable Janet.
Chair, I was just wondering, I had asked a question on whether they have a policy in place on collection of revenues, royalties, and they didn't answer, although he said they have a six step, but the 6th step leads to the askari requesting the CS to actually ask the police officers to assist them to be deterrent for collection of the royalties. But do they have something in place that can guide actually the arrest? And at the same time, the last speaker is actually imputing that the police officers are actually not doing their job, when they themselves should have actually put in place guidelines so that even when they are asked to arrest, to provide the person to court, then they should have provided, because they are not looking at that point that the CS has put in place. So this requires actually an agreement, an MOU. They must agree to sit and put in place a clear plan of how to operate.
Also, just hold on a minute, Honorable Basil. When you look at the National Police Service Act 27H, it says under the functions of administrative police service that they are supposed to rendering of support to government agencies in the enforcement of administrative functions and the exercise of lawful duties. That is one of the functions of the administrative police. So that speaks to, builds on what you are saying, that this is a responsibility. But I thank you for clarifying. You know, what was not clear was the clarification of the situations within which this service was needed. You know, the interpretation at the beginning was that probably you wanted police officers attached permanently to you to help you enforce this. But thank you for that clarification. Honorable Basil.
Yes, I wanted to tell my brother, we are not trying to say that the artists are not supposed to be remunerated through collection of loyalties. What is happening is many people don't even know whether they're supposed to pay. Because if you look at the club owners, those who are playing the music, most of them are not aware. So you need to arrange to have a consultative meetings with them, tell them what they're supposed to do, come up with an MOU before you call for a police. So that is what we are saying. Yes, so that is going to make your work easier without using police to collect debt. Thank you.
Honorable Juguna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would just urge the CS to decline that request. And let's not put our CS on the spot or put him under pressure by coming up with words like, oh, the CS feels like he's abandoning our youth, our musicians. No. From where I sit, the people who are actually abandoning the same youth are the CMOs. So the CS, I urge you, please don't be under pressure. Don't feel they cannot put you on the spot. You have not abandoned anybody. We know your track record. As Kenyans, we are proud of what you are doing on your docket. We know it's not easy. We understand that more are the decisions that you make behind closed doors, but those decisions keep us safe, all Kenyans. So on that one, we are grateful. They cannot put you under pressure. Thank you.
Hello, Honorable Vice Chair. If you have anything, then I hand it over to the CS. Honorable Yegon, you can take that 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think I have a different opinion from my two colleagues who have talked after me. You know, musicians, to be very sincere, our musicians in Kenya are suffering a lot. And if we are not careful, we are just talking about these normal hustlers, and we are not just doing the right thing by trying to agitate for them. We need to fight for them. And if money is going to be gotten by trying to put some few police officers to assist the CMOs, so be it. I think let's not try to overstep or to pressurize or to press on these guys who have been suffering a lot. We met them and we saw what has been happening with them. We need to support these people. These are our people. When we are campaigning for ourselves, we normally use them, and we hardly, even some of us hardly pay them. And they are just making us come to where we are. Let's fight for these people. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you, Honorable CS. I think the floor is yours as we come to close.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you. The speakers who have spoken. Chair, I would like to respond as follows. We are open to having this discussion, and when the committee requires progress, to provide that committee, because I think it's a legitimate discussion. The issues which have been raised are issues of law and the place of the National Police Service in supporting the work that is being done by Kikobo and the CMOs. Number two, As we are aware, the National Police Service is independent. It's independent, and the Inspector General of the National Police Service cannot be given directives by any person or entity except a matter of policy, in which case the Cabinet Secretary responsible for internal security can issue those directives under Article 245, as I alluded to in my statement. So no arm of government, no entity can direct the Inspector General except on matters policy where those directives can come. That is the product of our Constitution. Number 3 is I agree with the sentiments of the lawyers in the House, led by my learned senior, the member for Suba South, the Honorable Karori Omondi, that part of our misunderstanding as the Kenyan society and much of the developing world is caused by our distinction between offenses against tangible property and criminal offenses against intangible property. That's where the misunderstanding is coming. And if we perhaps try to scrutinize that space, we will then appreciate that the reason why the police protect you, a private person, from a robber who is taking your TV is because the police must protect you from being deprived of your tangible property. Likewise, a composer of music, a performer of artistic or literary works, a holder of copyright or patent rights, has the same and equal right to be protected by the law enforcement agencies from deprivation of their intangible property. It is property. Intangible property is property like any other. Your TV, your car is as valuable as the intellectual property rights in the music of the composer of that music, or the patent rights of the inventor of an industrial innovation. And I agree fully with my learned senior and the lawyers who spoke after him that we must protect intangible property with the same vigor that as we protect the tangible property. It's property. Because you have something physical, you have land. This other fellow, his property is in the knowledge which has enabled him to sing better than the rest of us. That is his property. The same way, you using your money, you have land, the other person doesn't have land, we protect your land. So likewise, we must also protect the intangible property. And therefore, law enforcement in this case must include the offenses created under the Copyright Act. Those are criminal offenses. And I agree that arrests should be made on people who have committed offenses under the Copyright Act. What we are not agreeable, and which can be subject for further discussion, is if the law enforcement sought by Kekobo and its licensees is support to carry out operations. There is a way in which the police carries out operations. And before any operation is carried out of involving the police, there is an operation order for that specific operation. First of all, there are the standing orders, which are general. how they operate. But if they are doing an operation, there must be an operation order with a commander, with the responsibilities, so that if anything happens there, because they are allowed by law to carry weapons, including deadly weapons, and extreme violence. They use violence sometimes to apprehend offenders depending on the resistance, the level of resistance. So the question which was asked by one of the lawyers from the CMOs, that why are we discussing MOUs and operational protocols for law enforcement? The answer is because it depends. If you are looking for an officer to arrest a single offender of violation of a copyright, one instance, you don't need an MOU, you don't need an operational protocol. But if you say, for example, you need the support of the National Police Service to carry out an operation in some section of town where you have a number of businesses which are violating the law, that is an operation. And an operation cannot go on without an operational order. And secondly, this is an operation like no other, because an ordinary operation would be an operation of the National Police Service officers alone. But now this is an operation involving other agencies who are not police officers. And that's what led to the withdrawal of this. Because should anything happen, there must be some accountability. And therefore the discussion on MOUs and operation orders and an operation protocol will be prerequisite, a precondition, so that we know in this operation, so that we don't have officers arguing with each other. Oh, you know, this is our business. We've just called you to. So do what I said. I am the CMO ED. I direct you arrest this one. Okay? And you know now, and maybe the operation commander from the National Police Service, they have their own way of identifying the circumstances of arrest and so forth. So it's not as easy as that. We cannot unleash armed officers combined with civilian officers in an operation of multiple arrests and law enforcement without an operational order and SOPs in place. Number 4, a chair, is that the notion that we are enforcing owners of music productions and owners of royalties of intellectual property to collect debts is not true. We are actually enforcing the law, but now with the caveat which I have provided. Number 5 is the CMOs have asked for interim reliefs because they have targets to meet, and perhaps that is something that we could discuss, maybe not here, maybe after here, and see how, if it is possible, whatever they're asking to be supported and in what circumstances, because we cannot take any action until the assurances which I have said are given. Otherwise, we will be defeating the purpose, we'll be even undermining the decision of government and NPS to withdraw on the reasons which I gave earlier. Of course, the CEO, Ezekiel Mutua, has talked about good faith, and I would want to add the public interest, because also all public agencies, including the National Police Service, act in the public interest. So if it's a public interest matter for this sector on copyright enforcement, it is something that we should be discussing. And the Honorable Kosgei asked whether the Bishop Emeritus asked whether who convinced that, and you know, he correctly pointed out, I think, because of our role in the ministry to provide policy directives, it's only fair that we coordinate from here, and we are going to take it up. Then, as I end, is to say that I appreciate is the member for Kangema or Kandera? Kandara, who has very strong views, and I think those views have some logic up to a certain extent. I just wanted to conclude, Chair and members, by saying that this administration, in its manifesto, has committed two things which are important for this discussion. First, this Kenya Kwanza administration has committed to depoliticize all agencies of national security and to make decisions based on the best interest of the country and not the whims of the minister or the IG or an individual officer. And number two, this administration has committed itself to enhance and adhere to the rule of law and constitutionalism. And from where I sit, the request made for the National Police Service to support lawful enforcement of violation of intellectual property rights by criminals who commit offenses under statute. That request is legitimate. Unfortunately, it cannot be processed in the circumstances we are in, and therefore I propose that we be given time. I'll be able to rope in the agencies involved, and then maybe get a time frame which is not too far, whereby we can report to your committee, even in writing, and then communicate to the agency the way forward. The request cannot be processed now, but subject to the assurances and ironing out of the procedural and operational issues, it has some constitutional, legal basis. I submit.
Thank you, Honorable CS. We sincerely appreciate. We know that you're equally busy, but you're able to find time to come and appear before us. We also want to appreciate the COBO and the team, the entire CMO team, and members of the real estate. Thank you so much. At this fourth estate, sorry. At this juncture, I think I want to call the meeting to an end. The meeting stands adjourned until further notice, until further communication.